Hey guys, Ariana here. Today is a big day for me. I want to rebuild my CR85 engine, and you can see chicks can work with hands and not just girls stuff. We can work and rebuild engine. So I want to make it cool, rebuild the entire inside. I'm going to install all new bearings and seals, new gaskets, putting in a new crank and piston. So let's get going. I want to go inside this engine and I have to take off this kickstart, this hose, cylinder and this cover. First step is to remove the kickstart. To do that, just loosen these 10mm bolts and then just push it off the spline spindle. Next is this hose, which is super easy to take off. Just loosen these two hose clamps and just pull it off. This hose can be real sticky too. Once that's done, you can spin a motor around and take off the ignition cover. This is held on with 5 Phillips screws. So once those are loose, it's easy to take off the cover. Just pull it off and remove the gasket. Now that we have the ignition cover off, the next thing is the cylinder head. When you loosen a cylinder head, loosen each knot a little at a time and in a crisscross pattern that will ensure that you don't warp the head. Once you get the knots loose, pull the cylinder head straight up. Next, I'm gonna take off the cylinder, which you remove step by step, just like the cylinder head in a crisscross pattern. Getting the cylinder off takes a little bit of muscle, so don't forget your arm day. If the piston wants to come up with the cylinder, you can tap it back down with a soft hammer. With the cylinder off, next I have to take off the piston. The piston has a wrist pin that has to be removed. It's held in with 2 circlips, so I use this tool to get the circlips out, but you can also use needle nose pliers. You only need to take out 1 circlip, then I use this small socket to push the wrist pin out. And there it is, that came out easy. Ta-da! Now we are really starting to tearing into the motor. We're gonna take off the right side clutch cover. This is held on with several 8mm bolts. You don't have to take the water pump bolts out. This is held on with several 8mm bolts, so remove those. Once those are out, you can remove the clutch cover. Sometimes this can be a little hard to get off. With the cover off, you can see the clutch. It's held in place with these 4 screws. I like to take this out a little at a time, just like the cylinder. Pull up the clutch springs Then we have to remove center bolts. I think it's easier to remove this clutch if I tip the engine over and I just drive it out with the impact driver. And there is a washer here. Next, you can pull off this inner hub basket and then the clutch plates. To get those off, you have to wedge something in between the gears. I use this little nut. You can see it in the picture too. Once you get this nut wedge in between the gears, I just use this impact driver to loosen the nut on top of the idle gear and I pull that off. Then it's easy to pull the clutch basket out. There is a sleeve behind the clutch basket you don't want to forget, so don't lose track of that. Finally, the last gear on the end of the crankshaft is easy to remove, and that's basically that in terms of the clutch side. I have the clutch out and all the gears next to it out. Next, we have to remove this shifter spindle which pulls straight up. And there is a washer behind the spindle, don't lose track of that. Next is this hub. To remove that, there is a hex bolt inside. It has to be removed. I use the impact driver to loosen that. Then there is this arm that is spring loaded to take off. Again, I use the impact driver for that. Be careful not to let these parts get separated. Pay close attention to this little pin right here. Take it out carefully with a pair of needle nose pliers. Then you can remove the idle gear that is connected to the kickstart. Next is the kickstart assembly. The kickstart has a spring you have to pull out. Then remove the entire kickstart assembly. Last is this retaining plate that you can remove real easily with the impact driver. That's all for this side. So I work in this side, completely done, and I want to work in ignition part. So let's get going. If you don't have a flywheel holder, you will need to get one. This one's made by Motion Pro, and basically what you do with it is install these two pins into the holes inside the flywheel. Then I just use an impact driver to remove the center nut. Also, there is a washer in here that I think is easiest to remove using this little magnetic wand. Next, you're going to have a flywheel puller. Mine is made by Motion Pro. One very important thing is to remember is that a flywheel puller uses reverse threads. Screw the big end into the flywheel and then tightens the small end up to the end of the crank. Use the opposing wrenches to push the flywheel away from the crank and flywheel will pop off. One nice thing to note on the CR85 is that the timing is not adjustable, so you don't have to pay close attention to the position of the exciter plate. It only goes on one way. All that's left are two Torx bolts holding on the exciter plate. Remove those. Now the exciter plate is ready to come out. Gently remove the exciter plate and the grommet, and you are done with the ignition side. So guys, until now everything was smooth for me. Just a little part I have problem because my hand is not too strong and I need help. But the fun part happened now because I want to tear down the cases and watch the transmission, crank and gears. Okay, now we're going down to the fun part where we split the cases. In order to split the cases, you're going to need a case splitter. The first thing you're going to have to do is remove all the bolts holding the cases together. One important thing to remember is that there are 3 bolts inside the ignition area. Remove all the bolts around the case perimeter. Next, don't forget the 3 inside ignition area. Now we are ready to install the case splitter. Line up these arms with 3 holes around the perimeter of the ignition area of the case half. Then screw in these threaded rods. The threaded rods need to go into the thread as deep as you can get them. Next, to tighten up these little gold nuts, they don't have to be super rough. Before we keep going, this sleeve usually stuck here and we need heat to get this sleeve out. So now that we've got this sleeve out, we're basically ready to continue with splitting the cases. I always spray a little WD-40 on the drive sprocket spline because it's always rusty. So just crank on the splitter with a big wrench and the cases will come apart. Once they break loose, they usually make a pop. Remove the case splitter and ta-da! You can just remove the case half just like this. Next, you can take apart the gearbox. Pull out the shift forks pin, then remove the shift forks. Don't lose track of the order that forks come out. Next, pull the shifter drum straight out. It usually comes out without any problem. Next, the transmission shafts come out. I like to have another pair of hands to pull this out. Keep track of the washers on the ends of each shaft. Now that the transmission's out, I'm basically ready to push out the crank, and again I use the case splitter like I did to split the cases, but in this case I'm pushing the crank out with the case splitter. You install the splitter the same way as you do when you split the cases. Tighten the center bolt down and you'll see that the crank usually comes out without any trouble. Finally, I have split the cases and take the crankcase completely apart. Awesome feeling! Okay, I'm done. You think we can do that? You are wrong because I do it, and now I think I need again my nail polisher because I can't forget that part. At the same time, I love this. I love my nail too. Okay guys, I think you enjoyed that. Please subscribe my channel, Ariana Mubli, and like it. Subscribe, don't forget. So the next thing I want to take it off is this part.
I'm gonna install a new crank, bearing, and seals.
What? Holy